So many years of catastrophe, more than 6 million refugees. It could be you and your family, forced from your home and your histories.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
Hello, I'm your host, Kathleen Wells, and welcome to Palestine Today, a radio program dedicated to news about Palestine. My co-host, British journalist and campaign filmmaker, Harry Fear, is in Gaza City, and we have an absolutely fabulous show prepared for you today, today, this Saturday. In fact, all Saturdays are fantastic. So join us and listen. If you want to know what's going on in Palestine, you'll want to listen to Palestine Today. We bring you the unfiltered truth where you will get nowhere else. As I mentioned before, maybe there are two shows that in the West on the radio that deal with Palestinians, and that's Don Bastani's show on KPFK and Jeff Blankford in Mendocino County. Other than that, you have to find it here at KCAA. You know what? I want to talk about the fact, I know I asked for donations last Saturday. I'm going to ask again this Saturday. Although we got donations over the week. Yes, we did get some donations, and I usually give a shout-out, a thank you. However, I didn't write down the names. I'll give a shout-out to the new people who donated next week. I'll do that next week. But the reason why KCAA has to ask for us, each show that is independently produced, to pay for the airtime is because what is the reason? Because it's an independently owned station. We're not a corporate owned station like Clear Channel. So we're able to bring you the truth. We're able to say the truth. However, that's fantastic. That's good news. But also we have to pay for our airtime. So I'm making a plea again today. Please, if you'd like to donate to Palestine Today, if you like the information that we are providing, if you like the interviews that you hear from Palestinians that you will get nowhere else, let me tell you, in the mainstream media, they don't talk. We rarely, if ever, get the news of Palestinians. But here on KCAA, on Palestine Today, you can expect interviews from Palestinians. But something very special today. We're not going to have an interview from a Palestinian. We're going to have an interview with Miko Peled, an Israeli. This is also unusual. Because usually when we hear from Israelis in the mainstream media, they're maintaining the same narrative. They're maintaining the status quo. But this is going to be new information for you to hear. So let me tell you something about Miko Peled before we bring him on. He is a peace activist and also a author. I read his book. I'm going to give you the title in a second. He's a peace activist who dares to say in public what many choose to deny. Mr. Peled was born in Jerusalem into a well-known Zionist family. His grandfather was a Zionist leader and signer of Israel's Declaration of Independence. His father, Matti Peled, was a young officer in the 1948 war and a general in the War of 1967 when Israel conquered the West Bank, Gaza, Golan Heights, and Sinai. His book, The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. But before I bring him on, guess what? I forgot to welcome Harry. Hi, Harry. Hi, Harry. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you so much. And really, I'm so excited for this show because we're very, very lucky, actually, and indeed honored to have Miko on the show. It will be, I think, probably one of the most fascinating and insightful shows that we will do on this radio station. And so without further ado, let's not waste one more minute without him.
Okay, thank you, Harry, and I'm sorry that I forgot. I didn't forget. I remembered, didn't I? Because I said, how's things going in Gaza? So Miko Peled, thank you for joining us on Palestine Today. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to hear from you both.
Well, so as I mentioned, your book is The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. Why don't you lay down the foundation or give the framework for KCAA listeners regarding the Israel and Palestine issue? Lay down that foundation, please.
The foundation of the issue?
Exactly.
Okay.
If you could do it in 3 minutes, Miko.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
I'm kidding.
By the way, Harry, I know you've got some interesting guests in Gaza. You've got Suzy Abul Hawa there and Ali Abu Nima. They're all there now, right?
Yeah. It's pretty inciting.
They're sending some interesting news from interesting posts from Gaza on Twitter. Well, in terms of the conflict, what's interesting about this conflict is that when you look at the argument on both sides, so to speak, what makes it unique is that the arguments are so diametrically opposed that it forces you to take sides, which is very difficult for people to do. You've got one story, the story that I grew up on, which is very romantic and very, it's the kind of story that you want to believe. It talks about the rebirth of a nation. It talks about the heroism of the small Jewish community who fought for their life after the Holocaust and were able to once again, establish a Jewish state and a homeland for the Jews who were persecuted for so long and so on. It's a very compelling story, and it's a story that for me personally was and for most Israelis, they have a personal stake in it. For me, perhaps a bit more because my father was actually an officer and fought in 1948 in the war that at the end of which Israel was established. But what's interesting is that it's all based on these truths that nobody bothers to look at. For example, the truth that Jewish people have a right to what they call return to Palestine or return to the land of Israel, as though they just left 10, 15 minutes ago or a week ago, and now they're all coming back. This right is based on the assumption that today's Jews are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews. And it may or may not be true. That's not the issue. The issue is the ancient Hebrews lived there some 2,000-3,000 years ago. So today, people claiming that they are somehow the descendants of that ancient tribe, and therefore they have a right to go back and live there. And again, they use the term return as though it's actually the people returning. But then you've got the Palestinians, their right of return is being denied, and they were forced to leave their homes and their land 65 years ago. They're still alive, many of them, and they've got the keys to the homes and the deeds to their land. Yet they're being told that they're not allowed to return to their homes because mostly it was such a long time ago, and they have to get used to the idea that they are going to live in exile forever. So you've got one nation that has a claim that's 3,000 years old telling a nation that still remembers the day they were thrown out of their homes 65 years ago, and they're telling them that they can't come back. So, I mean, this is how absurd the discourse is on this issue, so it's no wonder that people get confused. And then, of course, if you don't accept the Israeli narrative, then right away you're labeled an anti-Semite. And this is very difficult for people. Nobody wants to be called an anti-Semite, so it forces a lot of people to be quiet. But what's this got to do with Semitism anyway? What's it got to do with... I mean, so many Jews have always opposed the state of Israel completely. Many Jewish people all over the world are opposed to Israeli politics, Israeli policies with the Palestinians. So all these Jews are they not Jewish? Do they not count? So again, this is one of these absurdities that people throw out there, anti-Semitism, and they forget that if you actually support the state of Israel, then perhaps you're not anti-Semitic according to them, but then you're supporting a state that has thousands of political prisoners. You're supporting a state that has racist laws against half of their population, because half the population is not Jewish. And you have, then you're supporting a state that on a regular basis bombs and kills civilians, not by mistake, but as a policy. So if you're so this whole thing is so convoluted, this whole anti-Semitism thing, it makes absolutely no sense. But this is how the conflict is being portrayed. This is how the conversation is being conducted, and I can see why that could be very, very confusing. And then if you get to the history, if you actually take a look at the facts, then of course it makes it a lot easier.
Well, that's a crystal clear insight. Miko, could you quickly talk about this idea that Palestine never existed, that there never was a nation, and etc.?
Yes, it's interesting. I was at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville a couple of months ago, and I went to see Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello. And as soon as you walk into the house, in the foyer, there's a massive map of Africa that was drawn by his father. who was a surveyor. And I could see that, there's an extension of the land north and east of Africa, and there's something written across that land on the coast. So I was, of course, eager to see what it said. And sure enough, it said Palestine. So certainly according to people who are surveyors and geographers and so on in the 17th and 18th century, there was a Palestine. And I think if there was a Palestine, then the people that lived there were obviously Palestinians.
Thank you.
And I've been pointing this out on a regular basis to people. This whole notion that there was no Palestine, it only demonstrates the ignorance of the people who make this claim. I mean, I don't even know that it deserves a reply. All you have to do is open your eyes and read a little and educate yourself a little to see that there was a Palestine, and this was a claim that's being made, of course, by people who support Zionism and support Israel, because in order to justify Israel's existence, you have to go back to the myth that the Israelis today and the Jews today are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews, which is something that's very hard to substantiate to begin with. But beyond that, you have to take the culture that existed in Palestine, which was an Arab country for 1,500 years, and destroy it all and make it insignificant. And so they do that. They've created a new history. They've had Israeli archaeologists digging up the place and trying to substantiate their claims that there was this, that we are the descendants of King David and so on. And at the same time, destroy the monuments, the Palestinian Arab monuments, destroy the history, change the names, and again create this myth that we are the descendants of King David and so on, even though, of course, there's no historical proof that there was a King David.
I think Miko, I think that is so significant what you're saying. I don't even know if people realize how important what you're saying is. They gloss over it. What you're saying is that the people who are in Israel today, the Jews who are in Israel today, claiming to have some direct relationship to King David, is unsubstantiated. It's never been proven. So we're assuming a lot of things. Am I characterizing this properly?
Yeah.
So it's never.
There's a lot of arguments about this. I think the other issue is this, which I think is really important, and perhaps this is the time to say this. People talk about a Jewish-Palestinian issue or a Jewish-Arab issue. There's not a Jewish-Arab issue, and there's not a Jewish-Palestinian issue, because Jews are not the issue. Jews don't have a right to go to Palestine any more than anybody else does. Today we have a conflict where you have two nations that live in Palestine. You've got Israelis who are, like me, the descendants, the children and grandchildren of colonizers and settlers. This is their home because this is where they were born, and this is just the reality. They're Israelis. And then there are about 6 or 6.5 million Israelis, and you've got about 6 million Palestinians who are Palestinians, who are the natives of the land, who are there. So they certainly have a right to be there. And this is the conflict. This is the issue that has to be resolved between the Israelis and Palestinians. And when people try to bring in this whole the right of the Jews and all this nonsense, this is when things get out of hand and become even more complicated. Jews don't have any right to that land, like I said, more than anybody else does. American Jews or Polish Jews or any other Jews. But Israelis who are there are there. People like me who are born there, they've become, by default, they've become native now. And that is the conflict that has to be resolved between the fact that Israelis want to maintain their control over the entire country and not afford the Palestinians any rights, and indeed want to get rid of them, which is something that will never happen, of course, and bring about some kind of normalcy, some kind of a democracy that affords equal rights to everyone, where everybody can live, free and with dignity and so on. This is the name of the game. This is the issue. But I think the part of the problem is that people don't want to bring it to this level because it simplifies it. And once you simplify the issue, then, of course, the solution is there, and Israel and supporters don't want a solution. They want to maintain this conflict as long as possible because that is what allows Israel to maintain this non-democratic regime over the Palestinians and to keep attacking and maintaining this big army and so on and so forth. But I think, once again, I'll say the issue is an Israeli-Palestinian issue. It has to be resolved between Israelis and Palestinians, and the solution has to be affording everybody equal rights.
Exactly, and that's essentially the one-state solution. Is that right?
Well, that goes a little bit beyond that because the one state already exists. Israel governs the entire country, so it is one state. but it's a one state that's not a democracy. So yeah, it's certainly a one state solution, but it's a democratic state, democratic binational state.
And you say that people want to complicate the issue, and that Israelis, or rather Israel, does not want to solve this issue. They do not want peace. And yet you consistently hear in the mainstream media here in the West that it's the Palestinians, it's the Arabs that don't want peace. And yet you're an Israeli and saying the exact opposite. It's Israel that wants to maintain the conflict because it's to their advantage. It's beneficial to them to maintain this conflict. And we in the West, our politicians in the West, are helping Israelis to maintain this conflict under a shroud, under under this guise of wanting to maintain peace between the two.
Yes, people always claim Israel always wanted peace, and Israel always wanted peace, and the Palestinians, and the Arabs in general, only wanted to destroy Israel and never wanted peace. Israel never wanted peace. If you look at the actual policies of the state of Israel and the statements made by Israeli government officials over the years, over the decades, they always made it absolutely clear that peace was not a priority. And they didn't want peace because they knew that peace would mean they'd have to compromise. And the whole ideology behind the state of Israel, which is Zionism, is a zero-sum game. It means the land belongs to the Jews. We have to get rid of the people who are there and give it back to the Jews. There is no room for compromise on the land when it comes to, in terms of Zionist ideology and in terms of the policies of the state of Israel. They made it absolutely clear. Now, the only way to maintain this and to justify it is by showing that the other side are monsters and they won't make peace and they don't want peace and we can't live with them, they're uncivilized, they're uneducated, they're terrorists, and so on. And this is a campaign that's been going on for more than 65 years because it began before the State of Israel was established, to demonstrate that these Arabs and these Palestinians either don't exist, or if they exist, they don't have rights, or if they have rights, and they're terrorists and there's nobody to talk to. There's always a different argument that's being made at each point. But if you look at the history, you see there was always a reason why Israel wanted to maintain the conflict. And I think Gaza is a striking example of this. Israel has been attacking Gaza for the last 65 years on a regular basis. And there was always some excuse. At first it was what they called infiltrators, which were refugees trying to go back to their homes or to bring food or to bring in some crops from their land. And then Israel actually created a commando unit that was dedicated to punishing these people and going in and killing people in Gaza. Then later on they were called terrorists. Then later on they were called something else. Now it's Hamas. But there's always something. Because if Israel stops attacking Gaza, then the only other thing it can do is solve the problem and allow the refugees home. And that's something Israel doesn't want to do. The solution of the problem will always inevitably end up with the end of the state of Israel as we know it. It'll be the end of the state that prefers Jews and discriminates against Palestinians, because that's how a solution has to be. A solution has to include everyone, and a solution has to afford everyone equal rights and freedom. And Israel doesn't want that. So they keep attacking Gaza and saying, well, they started it. They keep attacking Gaza and saying, well, it's Hamas. And like I said before that, it was other things. But there's always a reason to keep attacking Gaza on a regular basis. And the tragedy of this, just a horrific tragedy, and I was in Gaza in January, is on the one hand the sense that this destruction is never going to end. These horrific attacks, these unexcusable attacks of policy of terrorism against Gaza is not going to end as long as Israel is there. And on the other hand, when you look at Gaza and you look at what the people of Gaza are able to do under these horrific conditions, you can only imagine what it's going to be like when people in Gaza are free and are able to travel and work and live like normal people, and what a paradise this place could be. So this is why Israel does not want peace, because peace will mean that this will be the end of the Zionist domination over the country, and they won't be able to treat the Palestinians the way they do anymore.
Miko, if and when there is a one-state, democratic state solution, could you just describe the binational status of that state and how that would work?
Well, I think there are lots of examples around the world where there are multi-nation states, and in many cases they function quite well. I mean, look at Switzerland, look at Belgium. Even if the two sides aren't crazy about each other, they live, in a democracy, and they have democratic institutions that they use. We have two nations in Palestine right now. We've got the Palestinians and we've got the Israelis. Like I said, right now Israelis have a slight advantage in terms of the population, but all estimates show that by 2020 there's going to be a Palestinian majority in Palestine. Currently, of course, it's a binational state that's governed by Israel. In other words, it's not a democracy; it's a state that favors the Jews. That has to be changed in terms of it has to be changed in favor of a real democracy and equal rights for both nations. Now, again, you can have two nations that go to the polls together and vote for whoever it is that they choose to vote for. They need to have laws that protect, the rights of the minority, whoever the minority may be. And you've got Israelis and Palestinians, and within that you've got some Christians, and you've got some other groups that, so there are several minorities that are there. And make sure that everybody's rights are protected under the law, or perhaps under a constitution. And I think because of the similarity of the two people, Israelis, this is something that a lot of people don't know. Most Israelis are the descendants of Jews who immigrated from Arab countries. Iraqi Jews, Moroccan Jews, the Syrian Jews, the Yemenite Jews, and so on. They're the majority today. They like to call them Sephardic Jews as though they all came from Spain, but we know that they're Arab Jews, but you can't say Arab and Jew together because Arab is a bad thing in Israel. But these are all descendants of Arab Jews. Or they call them Mizrahim as though they're Orientals or something. But anyway, that being that as it may, most Israelis are the descendants of Arabs. Of course, they're Jews. And to this day, even though this has been 3 or so, 4 generations perhaps, the descendants of the Iraqis will still say we're Iraqis, and the descendants of the Yemenites still say we're Yemenites. So in other words, they appreciate their identity, the identity of their grandparents. Now, if the younger generation don't speak Arabic, their parents understand Arabic, and their grandparents spoke Arabic for sure at home. So Arabic language and Arabic culture was part of their life. So you've got that going. Both societies the majority of the people who live there are either Arabs or descendants of Arabs. Both societies have very high education levels. Even in Gaza, I'm sure you know this, literacy levels are over 90%, and every other person is an engineer and a doctor. So, you have that on both sides. And if they had elections tomorrow, and the walls came down tomorrow, and again, I don't think it's a question of if, I think it's the question of when and how soon this is going to happen. And Israelis and Palestinians were faced with the possibility of voting equally, as equals. I think most people would vote along the lines of their own interest, as opposed to the lines of ethnic lines or national lines.
But Miko, what about
and then they would just move on. They would have the laws.
Oh wait, Harry's asking you a question. Miko, can you hold on? Go ahead, Harry.
Oh, sorry, Miko. The lines clashed and we can't hear each other. Yeah, Miko, I just wondered one obstacle to that amazing concept, I guess, would be the hatred on both sides of the wall to the other people. And I know for sure my experience in Gaza and Israel is that there is hatred to an extent of equality on either side of the wall. What do you think would happen to that?
Well, I'll give you an example of something that I saw that I lived through. The Oslo process ended up being a catastrophe, but in the beginning there was a lot of hope. And I remember the first few years, or the very beginning of the Oslo process, when Israelis could, freely go into the West Bank and eat and shop and so on, and Palestinians were able to go into malls in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The hatred, made way for this optimism, for the sense that now we can finally get on with our life. And I'm sure you're always going to have some people whose hatred and whose anger is perhaps, will never go away. But for most people, I think that is the model. I think that's what's going to happen. I think given the opportunity to go on with life and live in a normal life, and also knowing that, there will be some processes of truth and reconciliation, so to speak, where the people who are responsible for what took place over the last 65 years, perhaps, have to face the court of law. I think people will opt for the option, especially Israelis and Palestinians, I think, will opt for moving on with life and putting the hatred and the anger aside. Because people do. I mean, people prefer life, and particularly, like I said, in Israel and Palestine, when you talk to people, they want to move on. They want to get on with it. They want this thing to be over already. I always hear Palestinians say, well, if the Israelis only, came to understood what the hell is going on here, we'd be fine. We just need to explain this to them a little bit better. There's this belief that we can all in the end, figure this out and move along. And I truly believe that that's what's going to happen. The hatred will make way for hope, and then we'll be able to move on.
Oh, I love your optimism, Miko. You've been a guest on my Wednesday show. We're going to take a break right now, and I'm going to open up the phone lines. How do you feel about taking questions, Miko?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to open up the phone lines. We're going to take a break. The phone number is 888-909-1050. We're speaking with, my guest is, Harry and I's guest is Miko Peled, who is the author of the book, The General Son Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. He's a peace activist, and his grandfather wrote the Israel Declaration of signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence, and his father, Matti Peled, was a general in the IDF. He's a fantastic guest. So if you've got questions, give us a call at 888-909-1050. We'll be right back.
Gods are turned into a prison camp. Apartheid won't divide the West Bank.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
Can you smell the aroma of sweet, delicious fruit and flaky, melt-in-your-mouth crust? What is that? It's Cobblermania. Cobblermania is a specialty dessert company founded several years ago that sells delicious fruit cobblers that are baked daily and sweetened with diabetic-friendly agave. Agave, you ask? Yes, it's like sugar, but not sugar, and better than sugar. Cobblermania cobblers are sold at the Torrance, Hollywood, Culver City, San Dimas, Marina Del Rey Farmers Market. Also, apple and peach are sold daily at the Golden Bird in Los Angeles. You know Golden Bird that sells the fried chicken? At 83rd and Western, daily apple and peach cobblers. And yes, guess what? They're coming to the Pomona Fairplex Truck Fest. In fact, they're there right now, Thursdays from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Gate 1. Some of the favorites: peach, apple, mango, blueberry peach, blackberry, apple, white peach. If you go to the Pomona Truck Fest Gate 1 on Thursdays from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. and mention me, Kathleen, you'll get something special. You don't want to miss it. I've had them. They're delicious.
Playgrounds for Palestine is a non-for-profit 501c3 organization dedicated to upholding the Palestinian child's rights to play. This is a right enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We operate through a volunteer board and staff, the generosity of our supporters, and a lot of heart. To date, Playgrounds for Palestine has constructed 15 playgrounds in Palestine, as well as refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria. To contribute to this most worthy cause, please go to our website at www.playgroundsforpalestine.org or send a check to Playgrounds for Palestine, P.O. Box 559, Yardley, Pennsylvania 19067 at www.playgroundsforpalestine.org. Are you fascinated by the Middle East, but worried that U.S. foreign policy may lead yet to another war? Do you care about civil rights? For the past 30 years, the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs has brought its readers the real news, minus the corporate media spin. Read about Palestinians trying to survive the world's largest occupation. Learn how your hard-earned tax dollars fund that illegal occupation. Find out how much your members of Congress has received from pro-Israel PACs, and much, much more. Visit the Washington Report's website, www.wrmea.org, or call 888-881-5861 to request a free sample copy. Better yet, subscribe. It's only $29 for 9 issues. Mention Palestine today and get a bonus gift.
Call in now and give us your opinion on KCAA, the Inland Talk Express. Dial toll-free 1-888-909-1050. Or in the 909 area code, dial 888-KCAA. That's 888-5222. KCAA, the Inland Talk Express.
So many years of catastrophe.
Welcome back. This is Palestine Today. We're joined by my guest. My guest, Harry and I's guest today is Israeli Miko Peled, who is the author of the book, The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. I read that book, and let me tell you, it was heart-wrenching, particularly to read the section where the Israeli soldiers watched the Palestinian fishermen die. I mean, I actually cried reading that. Not all books can move you like that. So I was moved. Anyway, Miko, I want to say that... What?
I said thank you. I'm glad to hear the book spoke to you.
Well, yeah, I'm sure it moves a lot of people. It's like you explain it so vividly. You can imagine it, It's very masochistic for the Israeli soldiers to watch the fishermen or... You know the scene I'm talking about? Maybe you can describe it.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, can you describe it a little better than I just did?
Well, this is an occurrence that takes place quite a lot. I was talking to an Israeli, we were just a bunch of young Israelis sitting together. This is quite a while ago, and one of them was describing how during his service in the Israeli Navy, he was an officer, and their boats would patrol the Gaza coast, and they would come across Gaza fishing boats. They would have the fishermen jump in the water. They'd blow up the boat. And then they'd have them all count from 1 to 100. And then again, and then again, and then again, until they all drowned. And the soldiers, or these sailors, would just watch them do it. And the point of it was to demonstrate to these Arabs, who's in charge, who's the boss. And when I published that story in an article before the book came out, and I got a letter I got comments actually from several people who have either seen it, or it happened to them, or it happened to their loved ones, or who witnessed things like this on a regular basis, going back to way before I was exposed to this story. So this is something that Israel does on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. Israeli soldiers are capable of such terrible cruelty that it just boggles the mind. And I'll just say one. I'll go off on this tangent for just a bit. My sister, who is an educator, asked the question: how is it that Israeli youth, who supposedly grow up in a society and in a country that teaches democratic values, at least if you're within the Jewish Israeli community, how is it that they're able to come out and commit such atrocities and be such monsters? And so she examined, being an educator, she examined the Israeli school books, the Israeli textbooks, and she just came out with a book. Came out about a year ago when my book came out, called Palestine in Israeli School Books. And it's creating a lot of noise and a lot of waves. And she basically demonstrates that the Israeli textbooks were written are full of racism. It's a racist education system. And not only is it racist in terms of how it educates, it was designed as in a way that other racist education systems were designed. In other words, it follows a pattern of racist education that comes up and is typical and characteristic of other racist societies that have to educate their children to be racist against whoever the other might be. And this is, it's so shocking but it's interesting. It's shocking on the one hand, but it's interesting to read that this is not an anecdote. This is not anecdotal. This is systemic.
Miko, I just want to ask you, I cannot not. One thing which is striking listening to that, which is heart-wrenching, how is the cruelty possible? I mean, what I mean by this is, as far as I know, Israeli citizens are brought up as well as on the racism that you just alluded to towards Arabs, but also brought up on a deep, profound understanding of human suffering and systematic and organized human suffering. And I'm thinking about particularly what happened in Europe with the Holocaust and the persecution, not just there, but around the world. How can there be that duality of sensitivity to suffering and this cruelty at the same time?
I think it's a combination of a very effective education system and a campaign of fear, a very well thought out campaign of fear. People, the way that people usually ask that question when they do is, and I hear this a lot from Palestinians, is how could the people that have suffered so much now turn around and do this? And my answer to that is, well, it's not the same people. The vast majority of Holocaust survivors chose not to go to live in Palestine. Out of about 2 million refugees that lived in camps after the war in Europe, after World War II in Europe, Jewish refugees, less than 150,000 immigrated to Palestine. So very few Jews actually immigrated to Palestine after the war, and even before the war, when the war was imminent and Hitler was on the rise, they didn't choose to go to Palestine; they went elsewhere. So it's not the same people. But it's true. The way this is twisted and the way this is taught is that the Germans, or I should say the Arabs, are one more nation in the long line of people who hated Jews. And so, before the Arabs were the Nazis, before the Nazis there were the communists, before the communists there was always somebody. Of course, the reality is that this does not apply to Arabs because Jews did not have the same experience as Jews in Arab countries as the Jews in Christian Europe. In Christian Europe, anti-Semitism was part of the culture, and killing Jews was part of European Christian culture. That did not exist in the Arab world. But what they're doing now, and the way this is taught, is it's pushing the sense of fear from everybody because everybody's trying to kill us. And now look at the Qassam rockets coming out of Hamas, out of Gaza by Hamas. I mean, how else could you explain it but the fact that they want to kill all Jews? This is how it's twisted. This is how it's spun. And when you're talking to kids in a classroom, and this is taught by a teacher, then it's really not that hard to do when you think about it. And then kids usually are quite satisfied to accept the truths that are taught to them in their schools and what they hear at home. And, of course, the discourse outside the schools is similar in the newscasts, in talk shows, and so on. So it's not that far-fetched for them to come out of, after 12 years of education, or even more than 12 years of education, and believe all this stuff, and then they're given a gun. And the defense of the Jewish people, and again, if you buy into this entire myth, is resting on their shoulders. And these Palestinian terrorists are trying to take away our freedom and are trying to, kill us just like the Nazis do, and it's up to us as young soldiers to defend our people. So this is how the case is made, and this is why it's so successful, because it is quite sophisticated and it is systemic. So it's well planned and well thought out.
Well, it's kind of mind-blowing to have such a clear insight, as I described before. I mean, what at this moment in time do you think are the main obstacles which need to be cleared in order to see a just and democratic resolution?
Well, the obstacle is the state of Israel. There's no question about that, and the support that Israel still has in the West. But today, I did an event with Ilan Pape in London last month, and we talked a lot about this. Today, the most unwanted job for Israelis is to be an Israeli ambassador anywhere in Europe, because they have to constantly defend an indefensible policy, an indefensible state. You've got BDS popping everywhere. You've got student groups and churches that are coming out against Israel. You've got more and more unions and other groups that are supporting different aspects of the BDS, if not the entire BDS. I was in Ireland when I was actually in Dublin. The teachers' union voted to accept the academic boycott, which is probably the most controversial part of the BDS. here in North America, the student groups on campuses are doing just tremendous work, and the students for Justice in Palestine and other similar groups are growing in leaps and bounds. You know, the conversation over the last 4 or 5 years has changed here dramatically. You know, I speak at all colleges. I'm invited to speak everywhere, places that 4 or 5 years ago wouldn't even let Jimmy Carter speak because he said the word apartheid. So there's a massive change in the discourse. There's a massive change in terms of public awareness. It's not where it needs to be yet. And certainly America always follows Europe. Europe is always a little bit ahead of
I have to say that your optimism is absolutely infectious. I'm itching.
I'm glad to hear that.
That sounds
Look, if there was no optimism, what's the point of getting up in the morning and doing this work? I mean, there's no point in activism if you can't taste what it's going to look like when things are different.
Exactly.
And I can taste it every morning.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love hearing that, and that's why this show is important, because there has been a shift. Why don't we take a phone call right now?
Sure.
Okay, great. Hey, we have a call from, let's see, David in Vancouver. Hi, David.
Hi, Kathleen. Miko Peled, thank you so much for what you've done. This shift in the American perception of the situation in the Middle East, in Israel, Palestine, unfortunately isn't filtering upward to our legislators in Congress. The Senate on Thursday passed yet another resolution that essentially would allow for the U.S. Military to follow Israel into attacking Iran. Could you, as a former military officer yourself in the Israeli military and as the famous general's son, could you comment, please, on the significance of what our legislators are doing opposed to what needs to be done in the region? Thank you.
Well, I think politicians follow; they don't lead, and so I think American politicians and probably Canadian politicians too will follow once there's public opinion has reached the point where they can no longer ignore the reality and they have to stop supporting Israel. This Iran thing, every so often it has to come up because, and this has been Israel's policy for years, the Iran threat and the Iran issue has to come up in some form or another to remind as a smoke screen. Because as long as we're talking about Iran, we're not talking about Gaza. And, of course, if we talk about Gaza, then Israel is in deep trouble. Or about the refugees and refugee camps and so on. So while this is there's no question this is a very, very dangerous resolution. I don't think there's a chance that Israel will attack Iran because Israel wants the issue. Israel wants to talk about the threat of Iran. Attacking Iran allows Israel nothing. It doesn't give anybody, and there's no reason politically and there's no reason militarily to attack Iran. There is no threat. But the talk of a threat is very, very powerful. And if you remember when Netanyahu was at the UN a few months ago with that, cartoon of a bomb, he made the front page of every major newspaper in America, and I suspect in the West. Because it's something that catches people's attention. So I would say this is just one more step in that smoke screen.
Do you have a follow-up, David? Oh, he hung up. So let's focus on, or let's look at the media in the West. Give us your thoughts about the media in the West in terms of how it characterizes the Israel-Palestine issue.
Well, obviously your show is doing a good job.
Thank you.
So I mean that's important. I think the mainstream media is making itself irrelevant, and I don't know if they're going to wake up when it's too late. I'll give you an example. If you have an article about this issue, let's say something that I write, for example, okay? I had a piece on the Six-Day War, on the 1967 war in the LA Times last year on the day of the anniversary. And it was great, and, having a piece in the LA Times makes you look good. But when I have a piece on electronic intifada, that gets tweeted several times. It reaches 500,000 people within just a couple of days. And these are people who actually are followers of the electronic intifada or followers of Ali Abu Nima or and who have, I don't know how many tens of thousands of followers. So the piece reaches exactly the people that needs to reach, and it reaches a lot of people, and through Facebook and so on. LA Times piece people, the majority of people probably won't read it. Maybe less than half the people will read it, and it's done, and it's off to the recycling bin. So they're making themselves irrelevant because they won't allow, I think, themselves to expand beyond that very limited scope. And there's a limited scope which allows them to criticize Israel up to a certain point. You can't delegitimize Israel. You can't express a non-Zionist point of view. And that's kind of the scope. You can criticize Israel just a little bit, as long as there's what they call balance. But I think they're making themselves irrelevant. And the same is true. And of course, the LA Times is a little bit better than some of the others. And this is true for the print media. It's true for television. It's true everywhere. I mean, they are making themselves irrelevant because more and more people are using alternative sources of news and programs like this because they want to hear stuff that you don't hear on the mainstream media. And again, it's going to be, in the end, they're going to wake up one day and say, "Oh my goodness, what happened? How did we do this to ourselves?" Mm-hmm. And I think it's not. I think it's typical of this type of struggle. I meet a lot of people now, activists who were involved with the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s. The South African anti-apartheid movement. And they're talking about very similar struggle, and they're talking about a very similar opposition and a very similar difficulties and obstacles in terms of getting the word out and in terms of getting people on board. And they do say, a year before apartheid fell in South Africa and Nelson Mandela was released from prison, nobody would have anticipated this is going to happen within a year. Everybody said, well, it's not realistic, it's never going to happen, it's not realistic, it's not going to happen, and so on and so forth, just as like people say about Palestine today. So I think that's encouraging because these are people who have been through it, and we can see the pattern. We can see that this has been, we've done this once before, we can do this again.
So, Miko, what do ordinary people need to do living in California, for example, if the politicians follow but do not lead? What is the obligation and what can the strategy be for the ordinary man?
Well, I'd say BDS is probably the first thing that comes to mind, to study the whole issue of BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and see how you in your own life, in your own work, in your own field can contribute. Whether it's making sure that you're not buying, Sabra products or any other Israeli product, whether it's olive oil or anything else. Then take a look at companies like Caterpillar and HP and others who are contributing and supporting Israel, and there are many of them. And again, it's all on the BDS website. And that's a good way to support it. And then, of course, every time there's a petition out there to ask Alicia Keys or whoever it is, the next performer that's thinking of going, or Barbara Streisand or whatever, the next performer that's planning to go to Israel, make sure you sign that petition so they know not to go. Whenever there's any kind of official Israeli event or pro-Israeli event, to be sure to boycott it and to make clear to everybody around you that you should not support Israel. These are all things, and in LA, just in December, there was a big IDF fundraiser, and Stevie Wonder pulled out. A lot of us were out there on the outside protesting the event, and the fact that Stevie Wonder pulled out made all those dignitaries that went in look like fools, and they are fools, if not worse. And then support all the campus groups that are pro-Palestinian, and a lot of the kids on campuses are mixed groups. A lot of them are Jewish kids who are part of the pro-Palestinian groups here in America, and I'm sure this is true in Europe too. So support them, raise this issue in churches, in the churches that people go to. A lot of churches are reevaluating their issue. They're inviting people like myself and others to come and talk about this issue from, we're expressing this perspective, this very anti-Zionist perspective that I offer. And again, they're supporting BDS or certain aspects of the BDS. And then in terms of Jews, a lot of Jewish people have always been on this side of the argument historically. It's important to realize that, and then Jewish people need to, be aware of that it's okay not to go to your synagogue if they're flying the Israeli flag, or if they're forcing you to go or asking you to go to all the APAC fundraisers.
Mm-hmm. So historically, Jews used to be on this side of the issue, but today that's not the case. So we're going to take a call from Betty in Virginia. Hi, Betty.
Hi. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble talking, and I don't want to interrupt this discussion. I just want to thank you, Kathleen and Harry, for another great show. And Miko, as you may remember, I've had the great honor of meeting you maybe about a year or two ago. And I do wish more people could hear you. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Well,
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Miko, before we take the next call, I just want to ask, how is it that you haven't in some way been banned from visiting Israel or had your, citizenship revoked or something like this?
Well, it's because Israel is a democracy if you're an Israeli Jew. When we say that Israel is an apartheid state, it's absolutely true. If you're an Israeli Jew, it's a democracy. I mean, everybody around me, my family, my friends in Israel talk the way I do. Many of them live there. My sister is a tenured professor at the Hebrew University, and she says what I say. So, and she just came out with this book, of course. So, I mean, as long as you're an Israeli Jew, Israel is a democracy. And it still has, and I don't know if things will change if...
wait. We got...
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Harry, can you ask your question again, please?
Yes, sorry, Miko. Just to ask, it was my understanding that in Israel, Israeli citizens can't endorse or speak out about the BDS, the boycott. Is that right?
Yeah, it's against the law.
Great democracy. I think we have a call now.
Oh, no. Actually, that wasn't a call. But we only have, 3 minutes left. And so I want to thank, we actually have 5 minutes left. So, Harry, Miko, would you like to give us some closing thoughts? But before you do, Harry, would you like to have some closing thoughts? We've got 5 minutes. Maybe you two can
actually,
divide
not really. I want to listen to Miko because it's so valuable. Miko, I mean, could you just talk about, I mean, you've kind of already talked about what the ordinary person can do and get involved with. But could you just talk more about your vision for how this can be solved and what, let's say, for example, political milestones will have to be achieved for us to get to a one-state democratic state?
Well, it's hard to prophesy because it's like when you look historically at events like this, like I said, even in the fall of apartheid in South Africa, a year before it happened, nobody was able to anticipate that it would be a year from then. But I would say that you have to have some kind of critical mass. There has to be a real outcry, public outcry against what is happening in Palestine, which means people like us have to double up and do more of what we do of getting the word out, and then there has to be pressure brought upon the government to stop supporting Israel, or at least dare to call Israel what it is, and to shame politicians who support Israel, and to shame all the groups that do support Israel, and make it clear to them that they're supporting a brutal regime. And they ought to be ashamed, and to remind them what it's going to be like for them when they have to explain to their kids what side they were on when this conflict was going on. Because today you're not going to find anybody who will admit that they supported apartheid South Africa, although we know very well that many people did.
Yeah, I think that's important, Miko. I just want to say I think that's important that you say that we shame our politicians. That means the constituents contact our politicians consistently and persistently. Do you agree with that? Yeah. And yet activists don't do that. They don't consistently en masse contact their representatives. We had Alison Weir on last week. She said the same thing.
Yeah, I think they need to understand. I mean, politicians don't really care. They just want to, what they do, and get the job done. And supporting Israel is like a tax. You got to pay it so that you can, go on with your own political agenda and your own political life and career. But they need to know, and they need to be reminded. And I do that in my speeches quite often, especially if they send in those representatives, the pro-Israeli representatives. I remind them that they're going to have to explain to their children where they stood on this issue, and then they're going to have to live with their conscience, knowing that they supported this brutal regime and the actions of this brutal regime. So I think that's going to be a big part of that. I think it's an issue not of politics but of values. And if you support the state of Israel, then that means you are supporting a country that is torturing thousands of political prisoners and keeping people in Gaza under horrific siege and committing acts of violence that are that are unjustifiable and inexcusable, and you're going to have to one day explain yourself and stand perhaps before a tribunal and justify what you did.
Well, I want to thank you, Miko, for being our guest. We were just listening to Miko Peled, whose book is The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. Listen, I cannot recommend this book enough. I've read it. He's been a guest on my Wednesday show, and it is the book to read. If you read nothing else this year, pick up this book. His grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence for Israel. His father is a general in the Israeli army. You just heard the truth for the first time, right? Well, I recommend it to... What were you...
I was going to say thank you for the kind words. It's very sweet.
It's the truth. It's the truth. So I want to thank Harry for being my co-host, and I want to thank Miko Peled. Harry, do you have any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank Miko for his time. I really hope that we can have him back on again in the near future. And personally speaking, for me, having Miko on the show and hearing his thoughts and insights and story himself is bountifully inspiring and energizing. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure, Harry. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week on Palestine Today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kathleen. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You're on board KCAA's Inland Talk Express. KCAA, Loma Linda, 1050 a.m., the station that leaves no listener behind.
From the KCAA Weather Center, I'm Chris Earl Phillips. For this afternoon, gradual clearing and a high of 78. Tonight, increasing clouds, low around 56. Tomorrow, mostly cloudy, gradually becoming sunny and a high of 76. Tomorrow night, increasing clouds, low around 58. On Monday, partly sunny and a high of 76. Monday night, chance of showers, increasing clouds, low around 59. On Tuesday, chance of showers, mostly cloudy and a high of 71. Tuesday night, chance of showers, mostly cloudy, low 59. That's your weather for this hour from the station that leaves no listener behind. NBC News Radio, AM 1050 KCAA.
Well, hi again, everybody. This is Deb from Let's Go Shopping with Deb from KCAA 1050 AM and NBC News Radio, the station that leaves no listener behind. And we'd like to thank everybody for tuning in and coming on down to Lowe's today. Fantastic morning. All the prizes and gifts are given away. And we have Dale right here, the big kahuna, and he would like to say thank you also.
Hello, KCAA listeners. Just wanted to once again thank Bev and Shopping with Bev show for coming on down. They were here from 10 to 12, and we gave away fabulous prizes. We will be doing events all throughout the day today and, of course, the Memorial Day weekend, so come on down. We have some great deals. We have a lot of special value pricing going on throughout the store. We have vendors here to help support and get you what you need. So come on down. Once again, I'd like to thank KCAA for coming down and spending the morning with us. Have a great day.
Also, hey, this is Barbie from Risk 101 Radio with Barbie and Dan. You guys missed a great event down here.